Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to cast your minds back to those pleasant, sunny days in August. Some of you were most likely on holiday. Some of you might remember a story which appeared in the Daily Mail. It was about several young men, apparently also having a lazy, easy time of it. Not on the beach, not somewhere hot abroad by the sea. This lot was apparently living it up in Rochester Prison, and had posted a couple of snaps of themselves, grinning in their underpants just to prove it. And what happened to them? Within 12 hours, they were in segregation, locked up for longer in their cells, not hanging out with their mates, without a TV, privileges stripped, weeks added to their sentences after a swift disciplinary process. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how we do business now. When someone breaks the rules, there are consequences. I stood on this stage last year, and I promised you that this government would give you a better criminal justice system. A system that hard-working, law-abiding people can have confidence in. An end to soft justice. No more resigned acceptance that people who do the wrong thing just get away with it. A stop to victims feeling like they've just been let down all over again by a justice system that doesn't properly punish the people who deserve it. That is what we are delivering. I stood in front of you last year, and I promised we would sort out once and for all the legal position of householders who defend themselves against a burglar in their home. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is no longer a promise. It is the law. It's a law that makes sure once and for all that those householders know that we are on their side. I stood in front of you last year, and I promised you 2 strikes and you're out. I told you that if someone committed 2 serious, violent or sexual offences, they would get an automatic life sentence. Those aren't just proposals now. They are the law. And I told you we'd toughen up community sentences. I told you we'd had enough of people thinking they were the soft option. Well, ladies and gentlemen, from December, that will be the law as well. But actually, since I spoke to you last year, we have done much, much more. We are transforming the regime in our prisons, as those young men so quickly found out. I've banned Sky TV across the whole prison estate. I've banned 18 certificate DVDs. Heaven alone knows why they were there in the first place, but they've gone now. We've restructured the prison day around work and training, and we're getting more and more work into prisons. You know, I don't want any more lying around, watching Jeremy Kyle, spending hours in the gym. How can that be right when all of us, all the rest of the country, gets up to go out to work every day? And you know, if you're convicted of an offence, we now expect offenders to walk into prison in a uniform, not saunter inside in their own clothes. What we expect, it's very simple really, we expect prisoners to earn their privileges. It's not about sitting in the corner, not causing any trouble, keeping your nose clean. We expect prisoners to behave well, to engage properly in their own rehabilitation. That is the only way they will earn rewards from now on. They will not have them granted automatically. And there's another thing we're changing too. As of today, we are changing the rules so that if a prisoner deliberately smashes up his cell, he will pay the bill himself. It's not your job to pay for an offender's vandalism. And we're also putting an end to something else I think is an abuse in our prisons. You may know right now, prisoners can get legal aid to complain about the prison we put them in, and they can use it to try to get an easier ride elsewhere. Your money to pay for their complaints. Well, I think that's wrong too, and we're putting a stop to that as well. And while we're talking about legal aid, I want to tell you about another change we're making. I think if you come to Britain, you should put something in before you get something back. So I am putting an end to the situation where people can walk into Britain and get immediate access to most of our civil legal aid system. I don't think it's right that someone can just pitch up here without any connection to the UK and use the legal aid system at our expense. So we are putting in place a new residency test, which means they will have to wait at least a year after coming to Britain before they can ask for our help. And all of this is about rebuilding your confidence in our justice system. It's what I've been working hard to deliver for you. It's what my team has been working hard to deliver for you. Jeremy Wright, Damien Green, Helen Grant, Tom McNally. Our parliamentary team, our two whips, Tariq Ahmad in the Lords, David Evernett in the Commons. And our excellent PPSs, Lee Scott and David Rutley. And I also want to thank some of the parliamentary colleagues who've worked so hard for us in the last few months. Priti Patel, Nick Dubois, Robert Buckland, Henry Bellingham, Simon Reevell, Bob Neal, David Burrows, and many others. But we know there is still so much more to do. And so what I want to do today is tell you about what's next on my list. How many of you have heard those stories about rapists and muggers getting off with a caution, and you've thought, that is just not right? Under Labour, Britain built up a cautions culture, which brought soft justice to the high street. It is time that changed. It is right and proper that our police have discretion to do the right job for this country, but I don't think that it's right if you're out in the town centre on a Saturday night with a knife in your pocket, out for trouble, that you should simply get away with a slap on the wrist. I don't think it's right that if you commit a rape, you wreck someone's life, that you can just walk away with a warning. I don't want it to be the case that if you rob someone in the street, you leave them scared to go out at night, nothing happens to punish you. It is time we said to all the people who commit these sorts of serious offences, if you break the law, you will face the full force of the law. So I can tell you today that we are scrapping that slap on the wrist, the simple caution, for all of the most serious offences. And in particular, I can tell you we're scrapping the simple caution for one of the things that has frustrated all of us in our party the most, the carrying of a knife. I do not believe you can get away with a slap on the wrist for carrying a knife. If you commit a serious offence like that, you should face a much tougher sanction. And ladies and gentlemen, that is now what will happen. There's something else we've needed to do for a long time. How many of you are frustrated by the idea that when a judge tells an offender they've got 10 years, in fact, it means they're guaranteed to only spend 5 years in prison? No matter how they behave or what they do on the inside, whether they've tried to turn their lives around or not, it means 5 years and then automatically they are out. Do you know, the last Labour government actually went so far as to enshrine in law the principle of automatic early release for all prisoners given fixed sentences. Now, as I've said before, I do not like the concept of automatic early release. I don't like the idea that from the off, an offender knows he's only going to serve half of his sentence. And so what I'd say to you today is looking at that issue is next on my task list. Ladies and gentlemen, in fact, as Theresa said, this government's record on crime is pretty good. Thanks to her efforts, those of the police, those of my team, all of the great people who work for my department across our justice system, in our prisons and our courts, crime is coming down. Labour said we couldn't do it. They said we got it all wrong. They said crime would rise under a Conservative government. It hasn't. It's gone the other way. It's come down. But ladies and gentlemen, there is a part of our criminal justice system that we're only just starting to fix. Now, it's true, fewer people are committing crime for the first time. That is really good news. But the problem lies with the same hardcore of offenders going round and round and round the system. The same hardcore committing a crime, going to court, a community sentence here, a few months there, back on the streets, slip back into familiar ways, commit another crime, and the whole sorry merry-go-round starts all over again. Do you know there are actually people in our prison system who've been committing crimes for 30 or 40 or even 50 years? It's unbelievable, but it's true. At the extreme, we have people in our justice system who have 300, maybe 400 convictions and cautions on their record. There are quite literally people who have received well over 100 custodial sentences. Now, even if you leave those shocking statistics to one side, it is still the case that more than a third of offenders sentenced for indictable offences in the past year had 15 or more previous convictions or cautions. That is double what it was 13 years ago. Now, people don't just end up in prison because they've come from a tough background. Yes, many of our offenders have had terrible childhoods, fragmented education, issues with drugs and alcohol, suffered abuse or long periods of worklessness. But all of them are also there because of the choices they have made. And I am not making excuses for any of them. But we still need to make every effort we can, while they are in prison and when they leave, to turn them away from a life of crime. If we don't do that, if we don't work with them to turn their lives around, all that happens is that the long list of victims just grows and grows. Now, people often ask me the question, do I think that prison works? And the answer to that, very simply, is yes. Prison does work. It takes the most difficult, the most prolific of offenders off our streets. It protects our streets and our householders and our hard-working, law-abiding citizens. It protects our society. It sends a strong message about what we're willing to accept and what we're not willing to accept. But we have also to be realistic too about the fact that prison doesn't always work as well as it should at present. It is there to punish, it does punish, but it must also be there as the start of rehabilitation for offenders too. We have to help them with drug and alcohol issues. We have to help them get training and skills so they stand a chance of getting employment on the outside. And I hear this again and again from offenders. More often than not, what they say to you is they really just want a job, a chance to sort their lives out. And the truth is, all too often, they'll say to you, they just do not know how. And the truth is then, the old ways become the easiest ways. And that is really what we are trying to change. Now, a few months ago, I went to Pentonville to look at some of the training they provide there. I met a small group of men who were taking the exam for their forklift truck license. I don't know about you, I'm not sure how I would have felt about doing my driving test in front of a cabinet minister. You will understand I was quite relieved when they all passed. But the thing about watching them that day was when I listened to what they were saying, when I talked to them afterwards, it was striking to see how a group of people who had quite clearly failed in their lives so far, who'd never had any kind of proper job before, suddenly started to believe that there could be an alternative to crime, to prison, and to reoffending. And you know, what happens to those people, to offenders, when they leave prison is just as important too. One of the great scandals of our society, unbelievably, if you go to jail and you serve less than 12 months, you walk out of the front gate with £46 in your pocket and nothing else. That's it, no supervision, no support, nothing. These are the very people most at risk of reoffending, the ones who are most likely to come back through the prison gates, and yet when they walk out of those gates, there is no support at all for them. And you know, in all those years, under Labour, the last government just stood by and watched as all of those people just cycled round and round and round the system. They did nothing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say to you that this government is doing something. We are pushing through the most radical changes to the way we rehabilitate offenders for a generation. We're changing the law so that all prisoners will be supervised when they leave prison, not just those who get longer sentences, every single prisoner. There'll be no more offenders walking down the street outside their jail with nowhere to go and no one to help them. We're reorganising our prison system so that most prisoners will spend the last few months of their sentence in a prison near their local area, so we can prepare the ground properly for their release. You can't do that if they're hundreds of miles away. This will make it much easier to do. And we're bringing in the best of the private and the voluntary sectors to reinforce what the public sector does. And what I'm trying to build, what I want to see emerge, is a new kind of service, where prisoners are met at the gate by a mentor who's already planned for their release while they were still inside, met by someone who's worked out where they'll live, what extra support, like rehab or training, they'll need. People who are met by a mentor who will serve as a wise friend and supporter to them for a year after they leave. That is what our reforms are about. Nothing more, nothing less. They are about making sure we can do all we possibly can to cut reoffending and to make sure there are fewer victims of crime. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to spend a moment talking about the international challenges we face. There are two big issues on my desk right now. The first comes from Brussels. There is a very clear intent in Brussels to build a single justice system for Europe, with European laws, European punishments, European judges, European decisions over issues which have always been the preserve of our courts, even now the suggestion of a European justice minister to dictate the way justice works right across Europe. I have just one thing to say to that proposition: no. It doesn't have to happen. It's not going to happen on my watch. But it is another reason why we need to renegotiate our membership of the European Union, so that it is on our terms, not those dictated to us. We have to renegotiate our membership. We have to hold a referendum. We have to give all of you a chance at the ballot box to say in or out. I have another big international frustration too: the European Court of Human Rights. Now, European human rights laws were written by conservatives in the 1940s and the 1950s as a response to Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. Those conservatives had seen the Holocaust, they'd seen the gulags, and they said, never again. But for those people, never in their wildest dreams could they have imagined it would end up where it has. Twisted by a political correctness, that all too familiar Jobs Charters, I know my rights, and believe it or not, rulings by judges in Strasbourg that we now have to say to the most heinous murderers, you no longer are in a position where you have to go to jail for the rest of your life. Well, we'll be pushing back against that one, I can assure you. Ladies and gentlemen, all of this has got to change. For me, no change is not an option. We cannot go on the way we are. There is one small problem, though. We are the only major party committed to radical reform of human rights laws. Labour are opposed. The Liberal Democrats are opposed. Don't ask me why. It is blindingly obvious that the public want change, and it's absolutely obvious that the majority of people in this country do not think that human rights laws are fine as they are. Now, you know me. I would change the laws tomorrow. but we do not have the votes in Parliament to do it. So I want to make a clear commitment to you today. We will go into the next election with a clear plan for change. In the new year, the Conservative Party will publish a document setting out what we will do, when we will do it, and how we will do it. And then later in the year, we will publish a draft bill which will set out in legal detail exactly how our changes will take effect. And we will limit the role of the European Court of Human Rights in the UK. We'll scrap Labour's Human Rights Act. We'll make sure that with legal rights go legal responsibilities. And I believe our Supreme Court should be in Britain and not Strasbourg, and under a Conservative government, it will be. Ladies and gentlemen, you wanted a tougher justice system. We are delivering a tougher justice system. But we also understand the nature and the extent of the social challenges that drive offending, and we are tackling them too. Today's conservatism is still tough, but it is also compassionate, and it seeks to do the right thing for all parts of our society. But I'd like to finish with another thought, and it's one that's not just about our justice system. We're all frustrated by being in coalition. We all wish we were in government alone. We want to change our human rights laws, but right now we can't. We want to change our relationship with the European Union, but right now we can't. These, to me, are unfinished business. But you know, we are making changes in education, in welfare, in justice, in home affairs, that are real changes of the kind that we as Conservatives have always wanted to see. Ladies and gentlemen, in a year and a half's time, scary how quick it's coming now, we have an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss. I don't want to be in a coalition again. I want our party to be in government, in a majority, continuing the work of the past 3 years, but doing much, much more. Think what we could do if we were able to govern Britain alone. And think of the alternative. Imagine Ed Miliband on the steps of Number 10. Imagine Ed Balls inside the Treasury, or Sadiq Khan as Lord Chancellor. Think about going back to more borrowing, soft justice, immigration out of control, schools more worried about target than education, about going back to a welfare nation. Back in power, in 5 years, Labour would undo it all. We cannot allow that to happen. So over the next 18 months, we need to strain every sinew. We need to fight every battle. We have to get David Cameron back to Downing Street with a majority. This country needs nothing less. Thank you.